All right. All right, Greg, we're live into the Connect page.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, guys, how's it going? So we're glad you guys are joining us here. So we wanted to, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to jump into some actual scenarios that we have dealt with and might be dealing with right now from a brokerage level, that deal with agents, that deal with some lawsuits going on, deal with some agency issues. And we want to just talk to you guys about how we get into these things, ways we can avoid them, how we can avoid trouble. Isn't that right, Greg?
Absolutely. Our goal is to bring some of these things that seem rather arcane until they happen to you. Then all of a sudden it's no big deal, but all of a sudden it's now a big deal.
Right. So before we jump into that.
Hey, Paul, by the way, one of the things I want to preface that with too is that just because you've done things in a certain way for many years and it wasn't being done right, but you've managed not to have an issue, doesn't mean that you should continue doing it that way or that you won't have a problem in the future. So we would prefer to tell you what we believe is the right way, so that you don't ever have to experience a complaint or a lawsuit.
Right. Okay. So one thing we wanted you guys to think about too, in the meantime, is one thing that we talk about a lot internally is working on your business, working in your business. Realtors are notorious for getting caught up working in the business, which is like showings, offers, dealing with clients with emotions and managing inspections and ordering appraisals and all these types of things. That's definitely working in the business. And one of the things that Greg is always really, really keen on is being the professional, right? We've talked about how to be the best you can be, how to be the professional. So we want to just remind you again to think about being in your business and what do your buyers and sellers need from you when you're working in the business? How can you be the best possible in the business agent you can be? But then there's this other area that's called working on the business. That's 2 or 3 years later, right? So you worked with this buyer, you worked with this seller, 3 years have gone by. What do they need from you? And what did they need from you in the past that you haven't given them because you haven't communicated them in 3 years? What could we do in those time frames to care for people and work on the business, grow the business, talk about building out your sphere and being more in community with your clients and staying connected? We just wanted to plant those seeds. We'll talk more about those in the weeks to come.
Let me add one thing to that. As I think about this and I see what's going on in the broader big picture throughout the country and even in Michigan, more and more companies have Wall Street money, and their one goal is to get between you and the people that you've worked with. And they want to refer these people back to you, telling the public that they're the experts and they know how to get somebody to the right person. So when we don't do what we're supposed to do, or we don't go above and beyond, we've opened that door for one of your past clients or somebody that you know who should be working with you if they knew who you were and what you did and what you offered. They wouldn't be hitting the go button on a Zillow search and paying and then taking 30% of the commission for providing a name.
Right.
And that's what's going on. And what we want you to do is we want you to win this battle that's going on. And it is a battle. It's a big battle. Billions of dollars are being spent to get in between you and your clients, past clients.
A few years ago, the National Association of Realtors did a survey, and they discovered that the biggest risk to the real estate industry are realtors themselves. That we are the biggest problem, we're the biggest risk to this industry, mostly because, they released stats as well that said only about 6% of us actually follow up with our past clients. And what happens is that leaves a gigantic gaping hole for Redfin, Zillow, Trulia, any one of these other people, these disintermediaries, as you say, or these disruptors, to step in. And that's why Zillow exists, because they realized there was a gigantic opening here and that we were doing a really bad job kind of taking care of our past clients.
And what is it that they do, Paul? They educate. I mean, finding a home, not a big deal, but they educate the public.
They actually do. They educate you on what they're sending things like what's title insurance, how to prep your home for sale. I mean, they're doing the things that we could be doing. So, and actually Zillow right now, they just announced it, Greg. If you guys Google Zillow's, what do they call it? Their
iBuyer?
super platform, or their
Oh yeah, their super app.
Zillow super app. They're literally trying to, they will, and they are going to try to control the entire experience from start to finish. Because, you know, I don't know if you guys are aware, their stock took a pretty major hit when they got rid of their internet buying, when they stopped doing the automatic guaranteed purchases on homes. The stock market didn't like that. They took a pretty major hit. So now here's their new thing. And their new thing is just basically just try and do your entire job better than we can do it. So that's why we think it's so important to think about working in the business, working on the business. Never let go of your past clients, guys. So we've kind of hit that one. We'll do more on these topics.
Let's hit the case studies, Paul.
All right. So we have a case. We have one thing that just happened. It's over now, so we're not going to name any names. But an agent gets a phone call to go show a lakefront property. So sounds great. Love show lakefront properties. So he meets his client over at a lakefront home. They're looking at the home. They're checking it out. They walk outside. They're inside. They're walking around the house. There's a dock down by the water. So they walk on down to go kind of take a look back at the house. They want to check out the dock. So they walk onto the dock. When they walk onto the dock, they're about 2/3 or a third of the way down to the dock, and the dock tips over and collapses into the water, and the buyer injures her knee. So I don't know how badly it was, but it required some medical attention. There were some medical bills that were involved. And of course, the buyer's attorney, the buyer hires an attorney, and the attorney goes after the homeowner, and the homeowner has no homeowner's insurance on the property. And the homeowners are totally broke. There's no equity in the home. They're selling the home. They've got no money. So they can't recoup any money from the seller to help pay for the medical bills of the potential buyer. So this launched about a 1-year lawsuit against a 5-star realtor over the dock and the dock collapsing. And that's where I'm going to lead you, Greg.
All right. So story picks up, and I'll try to make this concise. That's not one of my gifts, by the way. But the bottom line is the buyer decided, and their attorney decided to sue 5-star, and they decided to sue the agent directly, which was really interesting. And we know that some contracts, listing contracts, have certain wording in it, but we have found out that others don't, and it's not standard. And in this case here, they looked at the listing contract that was being used, and it talked about the indemnification clause. There are indemnification clauses in some listing contracts. There are, but they're not all the same. They're worded a little bit differently. Michigan Realtors has put out one, which most associations use, that use the word in the indemnification. It said, if something happens in the house, and so the attorneys made the case that this was outside the house, therefore it was not covered, and therefore they could go after the agent for liability. Now, remember, now each of you is a 1099 independent contractor. You're a business. And I don't know how many of you have ever talked with your homeowner or casualty agent about homeowners, but it is something you need to look into to make sure you're covered. And by the way, an umbrella policy is not the same as a liability policy. And as a company, we have you covered on E&O. Well, the key to remember here is that errors and omissions, when you think of those two words, what are they talking about? They're talking about contracts. So this wasn't dealing with a contract. This was dealing with an event on a property where somebody fell and think about all the different things outside of the property, such as pole barns, decks, sidewalks,
Rickety
holes
old
in the
staircases
grass.
to an old basement,
Right.
hand railings.
Right. There are a ton of issues outside. So we spent some time talking with attorneys, as you can imagine. And so we made a recommendation to the Michigan Realtors that on the templated forms they use, it should say the property and all the pertinent elements to the property. GRAR in if you're in West Michigan, if you're in what's Mishrick, if you're in Mishrick,
Yeah.
the wording is pretty clear and it's solid and it's good. If you're outside, whether it be Travers and Aspire or Alma or Jackson, and some of the other outline boards and associations, you're going to want to look at that wording. The thing that we've discovered in this process is that, think about this. Well, it's one thing for the seller to indemnify you, but what about the buyer agreeing to indemnify you?
Yeah.
Well, certain agreements, buyer agency contracts, do have an indemnification clause, but if you choose the short form or the easy out, there currently is not an indemnification clause, which we will be adding to that. But to me right now, after going through this, I'm sitting here going, you know what, why would I go out and show a buyer a property without having them agree to indemnify me? So, well, if you get them to sign a buyer's agency contract, it's in there in the long form. And so you're protected. So I think that I mean, personally, I might even, we're looking at possibly creating a form that you just send out to a buyer that, hey, look it, I need you to indemnify me. I don't want to be responsible if you trip and fall out here at this house. I don't want to be sued by you.
When you go into a pool, a public pool, it's like enter at your own risk. And when you go to the beach, it's like, hey, there's no lifeguards on duty, swim at your own risk. It's pretty amazing that, and so just to fast forward a little bit, what happened, other than this agent losing like hair and like stress out the yin yang because of the situation, he ended up getting off. He was found not liable. But then what they said was, but it took like almost a year for us to get there, for them to finally make a judgment. But they basically said, look, there is no, it's unreasonable to think that this buyer's agent, who had never shown this home before, would have any understanding of the structural soundness of a dock.
Right.
And I mean,
Right.
it seemed obvious when we were first served with this case, and it seemed like, well, how could he possibly have known the condition of the dock? And certainly someone wouldn't step onto the dock assuming that your buyer's agent like had a structural engineer out to come review the dock before you stepped on it.
So Paul, let's end this. Let's bring this to a close and just say, look at guys, it's important that you know that you're indemnified and you're covered in case somebody gets hurt at a property.
And we're working on things.
This isn't the only story. And with an indemnification clause that's done properly, you will not have to worry about being sued. But you should look into a liability policy with your insurance carrier. Every business has it. And I'm going to guess that we don't think that a lot of agents have gone down that road and paid that extra couple $100 for protection with liability. But if you get in a car crash and your client is killed, or happened, unfortunately to hurt somebody else, that's not covered under E&O. That is casualty liability, which is in your auto policy. And but there's also an additional liability thing that's available to you to protect you. And so we just want to make sure that you are aware of this topic. The next topic I wanted to go into was, we've got one right now with dual agency, where the buyer is claiming that they really didn't understand what they were doing. They felt like they were not getting they weren't getting any representation. They've made claims such as, well, the agent knew the seller and has dealt with them in the past, so how could they possibly represent us equally? And so numerous charges are flying over this dual agency situation. And again,
Well, if there's more than one thing going on, and we're talking about the builder situation right now,
yeah,
Greg? All right.
Yep.
So I want to just set the table a little bit. So it was a spec build listed by a realtor with 5-star, and all of a sudden buyers show up unrepresented. They want to write an offer on the property. The agent did set up dual agency. And then the buyers started to want to make revisions to the building plans. And you know how builders love that. And so the builder said, okay, give us $5,000 non-refundable deposit or non-refundable EMD, and we'll start making revisions to the plan, and we'll start altering. We'll pick your selections. We'll put your faucet in. We'll put your countertops in, or whatever you wanted. So fast forward now, the buyers decide they no longer want to go forward. They're like, we're done. The house is taking too long. There's delays, there's supply chain issues, whatever it might be, shortage of labor, all the things that we're all facing right now. And so they said, well, we want our $5,000 deposit back. And they're like, you waived it. You waived it. You made alterations to the plans. The builder's like, I'm not giving this back. They actually did sign a mutual release stating they would give the $5,000 to the builder. Now, just because they did that does not mean we're out of the water, out of the woods here. Then they circle back around with an attorney. And so here's what happened. This is what happened here. They're upset about their $5,000 not getting returned to them. So what they do is their attorney said, let's attack dual agency. And so now we're fighting over whether or not dual agency was set up perfectly. And this all stems from them being frosted that they lost their $5,000 deposit. That's what kicked off a 140-page charge against 5-star at the board. And so you see that, Greg? So all of a sudden, the attorney jumps in and goes, oh, you were in part of dual agency? Well, there's our ticket right there. Let's go after him for dual agency. So that's where we find ourselves today.
Even in these situations where a buyer or a seller gets angry or frustrated at some point, they're not going to blame themselves. They're going to look for a scapegoat, and you are the scapegoat. So if you haven't dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, and you almost have to go, it's almost like this. We have a document that says buyer agrees to the non-refundable deposit of $5,000. Signed. It's all documented. We have it. Well, what they say now, typical person out there in the public that has now had a change of heart, and you, by the way, your relationship is cooked right now too. You're never working with this person again.
Right.
And so it's like, well, what could you have done? And the answer to me, as I've looked at these things over the years, is to just like document. And we hear it over and over again. We'll say to an agent, well, do you have it in writing? No, we mostly did phone calls. And I'm here to tell you that you are professionals and you are experts, and you have to protect yourself and document things. So if there's a phone call, document it. Send a copy to the buyer. Say, hey, confirming that we talked about this. Because a lot of times where they're going to go is, well, we didn't understand what we were signing. Or there was all these papers put in front of us, and it was just a flurry of things. And who are we? We're nobody. And you're the expert. So the expert should always have the documentation to prove what they said and what they did not say. And so, Paul, anything else you want to cover on this one here?
I think the thing that is, I think we're going to be okay on that actual on that case. I think based upon some news we had today. But the important thing to note is it's the dual agency that caught the attention of the attorney, because 9.5 times out of 10, an agent doesn't set up dual agency properly and does not disclose it properly. So it's a very easy target, which is why.
So Paul, okay, so Paul, give them an example of how would you disclose dual agency properly?
Well, to do dual agency, you have to have a buyer's agency contract. You have to have a listing agency contract. So what happens is this: she's first listing the property. So then she has to say, hey, seller, I've got these buyers here. They want to be represented by me. Not every buyer asks for that, by the way. We'll talk about that in a second. but you need to have, it's multiple things, Greg. You have your listing agency contract, you have a buyer's agency contract, and then both parties sign a dual agency disclosure contract. And then you have to update your agency disclosure relationships to state dual agency relationship exists. So there's about 5 or 6 documents that have to take place for you to properly set up dual agency. It's not simply.
By the way, the agency document, the dual agency document explains, there's about 5 or 10 points on there of what this means. Well, the buyers and the sellers will claim they didn't understand. And so how do you go that next step? And so here's an example that we had, and we talked about this in the past. One of our agents had a seller who was a friend, good friend, longtime friend, childhood friend. And she says to the seller, hey, in some cases, I could end up being a dual agent. Oh, sure. The seller says, oh, no problem, as long as it doesn't hurt me, you know?
Yeah.
Well, it was dropped right there and it went forward. So eventually the agent gets a buyer themselves. So now they're going to go into a dual agency position, goes back and has the seller sign it. Now the offer comes in. Seller says to the agent, well, what should I do? Well, guess what? In a dual agency scenario, it says right in the contract, you cannot have that discussion and give your opinion to that seller about how they should counter it, because that could be seen as disadvantaging the buyer. And you can't lean towards one or the other. Basically, in a lot of ways, you could say dual agency turns you into a courier in a lot of ways.
It's almost like a transaction coordinator to a certain extent.
And then the seller further says, so I'm paying you $20,000 to represent me. And now if you had fully explained to me at that time that this dual agency conversation came up, because remember, I'm just the public and I don't know anything. If you would have fully explained to me this scenario, that you would not be able to represent, advise, counsel, give your opinion. If you had told me that that was what this meant, I would have never agreed to this.
Right. And so this is why you and I have always done it a little differently. And I think it's pretty commonly done. I have zero problem with being the only realtor involved. I've done many, many transactions where I'm the only realtor involved. I don't think that dual agency gives me any better representation for either party. I think it actually makes it more difficult. I don't think anyone really wins, or I think it's just tough. So I would have probably taken this buyer and said, hey, I represent the builder. Obviously, I'm sitting at the open house. My sign's in the yard, right? We all know who I represent. So I'm happy to help you create an offer for the builder. I can set up a meeting for you guys. We can get your offer drafted. We can see how the builder responds to it. And I'm happy to help quarterback this thing towards a closing. But I would never tell that person that I could actually look out for their best interests over the builder's best interests. But I can work to make sure that everyone is on the same page. We're all clear on what the objectives are. The terms are made clear, and I can be the only realtor involved. So that's how I've always done it. I've always maintained as the seller's agent representation. And I've never had a buyer have a problem with that. And I've never feigned that I do represent the buyer.
Yeah. As an agent I was talking to the other day said, the way I've discovered to talk about this topic is that, yes, you can get a dual commission, but a dual agency is a whole new animal. And it's a difficult, dicey thing. And again, most of you are going to tell us right now, you know what? I've been doing this for years. I've never had a problem. That's perfect. All I'm saying is that if you get into one of these scenarios, it will ruin your day, your week, your month, possibly half your year, because it'll be a miserable experience. And you can avoid it right up front. You don't have to go there. But Paul, I want to jump into the next one, which is next one is waiving inspections, which is, I think, become fairly common in this marketplace. And we just now have an issue that popped up the other day where there's a lawsuit.
Well, we got two that are very similar, where they have waived inspections.
Right. And what the client is now claiming, you can only imagine at this moment, they move in, it could be water in the basement, it could be a structural issue, It doesn't matter at this point. The point is, in that flurry of activity, they told you most likely they were willing to do anything to win that deal. So you obliged. You said, well, to make that happen, we're going to have a non-refundable deposit. We're going to waive inspections. We're going to give an appraisal shortage guarantee. We're going to do anything and everything that possible. So I think when you get into this scenario, the one extra step that you may want to consider is just saying, hey, I have to make sure that, you know, we've had this discussion, and the only way for me to do that is to document it, that I told you that you knowingly went down this after having this discussion. We discussed both sides, pros and cons. Why not to do it, why to do it, what could happen, what the dangers were, the risks were. You agreed that you were willing to accept the risk. And if you had that document, or if you had it in writing in an email, that, hey, I just want confirmation that you acknowledge that we've had this discussion, because I really don't want to ever have a problem with you guys down the road where we forget something that maybe was said and there's nothing documenting it. And it's just, it's an appropriate way to do business.
And here's a pro tip for everyone listening. When we have one of these issues that comes up at the association, or if we get some sort of like a subpoena from an attorney wanting information, you have to have your timelines documented. So they're going to ask for text messages, emails, documentation, and it is a lot of work to put all this together. A lot of work. Like I think we just, I mean, sometimes we see people submitting 90-page explanations of what took place. So it's extremely frustrating, and it's time consuming. But on this particular one, we have two. One of them, the buyer claims they did not know it was a modular home. The other one claims they had that the seller and the realtor, the buying agent, lied about there being water in the basement. So really quickly, the house, the modular home, the agent has text message threads saying this home is a trailer on blocks in a text thread, right? On the other one with the water in the basement, we have documentation where, and we have proof that the listing agent, the buying agent, and the buyers sat there on the front porch talking to the listing agent, discussing water in the lower level. And the agent said, yes, there has been water in the lower level. The sellers are trying to find a remediation company to resolve the water in the basement. And so it's really, really important that you have people who can corroborate your stories, documentation corroborating your story, documentation waiving things. Anything you can do to add that extra level of clarity is going to be huge when someone, as Greg puts it, buys the home, takes the risk, and now wants to blame you for all of their problems.
All right. So to wrap this up, I think that I want to circle back to what you said in the very beginning, Paul, about what we would like to ask all of you to think about here in the next week. Yeah. And that was, what is it that a seller wants from you during any process which is working in your business? And then the follow-up to that is, what do they want when they're not working with you? And we ask this question because this is the crux of what we're doing here. This is about building a referral sphere-based business that's going to come to you, and you won't be chasing it. You will be attracting. That's one of the things they talk about in Ninja, is attracting versus chasing. And so we just want to encourage you to think about these things in the coming days of what is it that you're doing to make sure that these people know you're out there and around, and they would never, ever go ahead and click that button on Zillow to say, get me an agent. They've already got you. Why do they need to go pick some unknown person given to them by a website? That's crazy. Especially when you've got so much to offer them, but they just maybe don't know it because you haven't figured out how to tell them. So,
and if you need help thinking about ways to follow up with your past clients and stay in touch, like raise a hand. Raise a hand. We want to, like, I always kind of like to finish it with this. Like, this is an invitation every single time for you to connect with us. We've got an amazing broker support team. We got myself, Mary in marketing. We're willing to take meetings anywhere. We'll do Zooms, we'll grab coffee, whatever you want to do, but we want to help you have the best year ever. So that's all I got.
All right. Hey, you guys have a great week, and
All right.
get them. See ya.
All right, guys. We'll see you. Thanks, Greg.
Bye.
Adios.